Hello everyone, it is I, the Cogneuro Connoisseur. This channel here is to educate people on the basics of neuroscience and apply it to how it can be used in the real world. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's cool, but what's neuroscience? Well, neuroscience is defined as the study of the structure or function of the nervous system, which includes the brain. Cognitive neuroscience is a branch of that which will focus on how these brain and nervous systems biology affects our mental processes. Think of it like a mix of psychology and neuroscience. This is not the easiest topic to cover, so this video will be dedicated to covering the basics of neuroscience. This way, I'll be able to discuss the more advanced parts of it without it being completely confusing, and you may be able to understand how this can be applied to real life. So, without further ado, let's talk about the building blocks of the nervous system. The nervous system consists of the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and ganglia to control the body's response to stimuli, which can be anything that evokes a reaction physically or mentally. This can be anything from a specific word to a huge malevolent bear. The nervous system is just as important as our bones and muscles and interacts with the two to control our movements and emotions. The nervous system consists of two types of cells, neurons and glia. Let's talk about the neurons first. Neurons are in charge of information delivery like a mailman. Similar to a mailman, they deliver information throughout the body. This information can be something like pain or arousal. The neuron consists of three main parts, the dendritic tree, the cell body, and the axon. In broad terms, the dendritic tree receives information from other cells. The cell body is like the vital organs for the neuron, and the axon is the extended part that gives the information out to other cells. Neurons vary greatly in shape depending on their purpose. Then there's the glia, which outnumber the neurons 10 to 1. They nourish the neurons and provide structural support. They're more or less the armor of the neurons, and it may be the support, but that doesn't mean they're useless. Now, you might be thinking, there's a lot of moving parts here, so is there a way to categorize the brain and other things into sections? The short answer is yes. Generally, we divide the nervous system into two parts: the central nervous system, which has the vital brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is where everything else like the nerves and ganglia are. The spinal cord is the main elevator for our nerves. If something like our arm needs to move, our brain sends a signal that travels through the spinal cord and tells the arm to move. Also, if our arm experienced a burn, signals would move from there to the brain so that we experience pain. The spinal cord is very important, so it's encased in cerebral spinal fluid and a bony spinal column like a protective waterbed. If it's damaged, it could disable the elevator and leave the person paraplegic or quadriplegic depending on where the damage is. Then we have all the basic components of our nervous system. There are many important things within the brain, and quite honestly, we could be here for hours discussing all of this in length. But in the interest of time, I will keep this part brief. Let's break down the parts of the brain. First, we have the medulla, which is in charge of many of our vital functions. It contains most of the cell bodies of our main 12 cranial nerves, acts as a bridge for our motor nerves to cross, controls respiration and heart rate, and contains the reticular activating system, which is important for regulating our consciousness. In short, it's very important. Second, we have the cerebellum, which controls our motor movements and balance, letting us catch things or type a script and make drawings. Damage here can deteriorate one's precision of movement and balance. Then we have the pons, which is our connective bridge from the cerebellum to the rest of the brain. Right above the pons is the midbrain, which holds the inferior and superior colliculus, letting us orient to things with our eyes and ears. If that angry bear I mentioned above were to chase you, the colliculi would kick in and inform you where that bear is and that it is headed towards you. After that, there's the hypothalamus, which controls our behaviors that help our body satisfy its needs, like eating. It lets us know when we need to do something to keep up homeostasis, which is the stable state of our body. Then there's the regular thalamus, which is a relay center for all of the nerves that sorts out the information and sends it to its appropriate location. The last brain part to note is the cerebral cortex, which is the entire outer layer of the brain. It's the part that has all those bumps known as gyri and valleys known as sulci. The cerebral cortex also has fissures, which are particularly large valleys that divide the brain into 4 sections or lobes. This includes the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. Now, there's entire sections on the details of the cerebral cortex and other internal processes like electrical signaling, but I think this is an adequate amount of information. You should hopefully have an adequate idea of how the nervous system works and some knowledge on the most important parts of the brain. But this begs the question, how can this be applied to real life? Well, this knowledge can certainly be applied to healthcare. Knowledge of how the different parts work and what happens when those parts are damaged could inform the doctors what is specifically wrong with a patient and how they could recover. So to my pre-med viewers, a couple of courses in neuroscience could prove useful. This could also be used in a mental health setting, given that the brain can greatly affect mood, and they would be able to find and identify what is going awry neurologically, and that could be quite helpful if you were a psychologist. Finally, this could just be used for daily life. Learning about the nervous system could explain our daily habits and decision-making, and acknowledging it is the first step for improvement. So, that's going to do it for the debut video. Let me know if I need to clear up anything, and if you're still feeling completely lost, feel free to rewatch the video or watch another video that may explain it better. But if I did a good enough job, feel free to subscribe. I think it would help out the channel, and you would be pretty cool if you did that. So yeah, that's going to do it for now. Until the next video, stay sharp. Hello everyone, it is I, the Cogneuro Connoisseur, back with another video on neuroscience. In my last video, I covered the basics of the nervous system and the brain. This time, I'm here to talk about sensation and perception, which focuses more on the eyes and ears, and what goes on within them to process information so that we can all react to a malevolent bear. We're going to start with how visual processing works. It all begins with the retina, which is the initial receiver of light, and that is what we perceive all the time, except it's broken down into components. Upon receiving this light, the retina transfers it to the rods and the cones. The rods and the cones then turn the light into electrochemical energy that can be read by the nervous system like code. The rods and cones then feed into ganglion cells, which send the code to the brain. Every one of these rods, cones, and ganglions have receptive fields, which means they only receive light information in a certain area of effect. Ganglion cells are a little weird in that they get turned off by light in the center of their field, but get turned on by light in the outskirts. They're set up like this to highlight when there is contrast between light and dark, which is important given their purpose is to provide specific information to the brain. Once the information has been sent to the brain, it will then travel along one of 2 routes. Path number 1 is the tectopulvinar pathway, which is the express pathway. It's very fast-acting and coded for coarse patterns and motion, which is useful for when there is rapid motion that could be an immediate threat. This is done via the superior colliculus, which was mentioned in a prior video and will be explored further in a future video. Afterwards, this information will go to the thalamus and motor regions to turn the head towards the source of rapid movement or danger. The second route is the geniculostriate pathway, which is what allows us to see color and the finer details of whatever we're looking at. Most of the optic fibers go from ganglion cells to here because most of what we see isn't immediately threatening. From here, information goes to the lateral geniculate nucleus, or LGN for short. The LGN consists of 6 layers, 3 of which get information from the left eye and 3 from the right. Then there are magnocellular and parvocellular layers. The first 2 layers are magnocellular layers that work for motion detection, while the other 4 are parvocellular layers that work for color and fine detail. Each layer has a retinotopic map, which preserves the light information we get from the retina all those milliseconds ago to create a spatial map of half the world. After all of that traveling, the information finally ends up in the primary visual cortex, where it gets processed in extremely fine detail, more so in the center than the periphery. That explains why we see things in more detail in the center of our point of view. It's a very impressive system overall, but I don't know if we have enough time to explain how the entire thing works. What matters is that you know how the visual information travels. Once this information is looked at through the microscope of the primary visual cortex, the information will then go to the ventral and dorsal streams. The ventral stream is used to identify the object and is known as the what pathway. Meanwhile, the dorsal stream is used to locate the object in visual space and is aptly named the where pathway. However, this is a good checkpoint to stop at, so we'll talk more about these pathways in future videos. But just before I go, I promised to discuss how auditory information is processed. Similar to how visual processing starts with the eye, audio processing starts with the ear. Audio processing starts when sound waves from the source of noise stimulate our little ear hairs called cilia. The information from the cilia then goes to the cochlea, a little spiral thing deeper within the ear, which then takes a bunch of pit stops within the brain, including the inferior colliculus, and eventually goes to the auditory cortex. This then creates a tonotopic map, which is like a retinotopic map, but for sound instead of light. Then the brainstem computes where the sound is using both ears as a reference, all of this in under a second. It's very impressive. There's obviously much more to this very elaborate system, but you may be wondering, how can sensation and perception be applied in the real world? All of this information on how signals travels is very cool, but why is this important? Well, understanding the details of sensation and perception could be quite useful when it comes to making human-friendly designs and interfaces. If a company had intricate knowledge on how information was processed within our brains, they could use their knowledge to design an app that gels the best with our brains. There's also the use of it within medicine, of course. If somebody were to have deficits in sensory processing or were suffering from sensory overload, which I believe is a genuine condition, doctors could use the information about how electrochemical signals travel to potentially come up with a method of fixing or at least abating the condition. Learning the ins and outs of sensation and perception can be used within art as well. Knowing what stimulates the person the most could be helpful when making artwork designed to truly pop out of the page or making a video game that is meant to be exceptionally immersive. The possibilities to how this can be applied to the art field are limitless as far as I'm aware. So, that will do it for this episode. I hope I explained it well enough, and if I did, feel free to subscribe. If not, I can try my best to clear things up in the comments, though I'm no professional. I'm a college student, not a neuroscientist, with a PsyD. So, next time, we'll discuss how we recognize objects. Now that we've perceived the object, we need to know what it is. Well, until next time, stay sharp. Hello everyone, I'm the Neuro-Connoisseur, back at it again with another video teaching the basics of neuroscience. So far, I've covered the basics of the nervous system and how we process sensory information. However, I have yet to cover the whole picture of where that sensory information travels and how it affects what we perceive. So today, I'm going to discuss the ventral visual system, which will provide you with more details about where the sensory information travels and what we learn what an object is. So, let's get started. What is the ventral visual processing stream, you may ask? You see, this is the system that informs us what an object is, and thus is known as the what pathway. It resides in the occipitotemporal and temporal lobes near the back and the bottom of our brain, and in human brains is quite similar to the inferotemporal cortex, which we will refer to as the ITC. The ITC is relevant because it is actually the final destination for object recognition, and it connects the parts of the frontal lobe, allowing us to give meaning to the objects we see. I know, just when you thought our information mail, so to speak, had reached its destination, the path in which it travels continues onward in our infinitely complex brains. One could think of it like a labyrinth, almost. There's more to this, of course. An interesting property of the what pathway is that the neurons further along the ventral stream fire to more complex stimuli. This means that the neurons just outside of the primary visual cortex can respond to something as broad as the color blue or anything remotely square-shaped. Meanwhile, the neurons as deep as the ITC may only respond to something specific like a hand or a malevolent bear. Another thing to note is that cells further along the what pathway have larger receptive fields, which, as a callback to the previous episode, means that the cell is sensitive to a much broader area. This is quite helpful for object recognition, given that's the purpose of this what pathway. Now, the ability to locate where the object is in space gets traded off, but that weakness gets covered by the where pathway, which will be covered next video. Now, if the what pathway is damaged, this can result in types of agnosia, meaning without knowledge, that disable certain visual processes for an individual. There are two main types of agnosia that involve this pathway, the first being apperceptive agnosia, which happens when the part of the ventral stream closer to the primary visual cortex is damaged. This type of agnosia lets the people process visual information, but they can only process the very basics like colors and shapes, and they can't form a whole object from these components, and this can be very disorienting for them. Meanwhile, associative agnosia happens from damage in the inferotemporal cortex, the ITC, and this allows people to still be able to form a perceptive whole and see the entire object, but they can not connect what they're seeing to stored information and thus cannot recognize what it is. This may be because that connection to the frontal lobe, the thing that lets them know what they're looking at, the connection to it is disrupted. Now, for those whose vision hasn't been disrupted, our what pathway gives us the ability to tell what something is regardless of how it is presented. For example, we know what a bowl of pudding looks like regardless of whether it's right in front of us or portrayed in a comic book or painting. This is known as form-cue invariance. We also have the ability to tell that the bowl of pudding is indeed a bowl of pudding from many different angles, whether it's from the side or a bird's eye view, which is perceptual constancy. Now, this is all accomplished by our lateral occipital complex, and as far as I'm aware, research is trying to find out why this occurs, but it is still very important regardless. Now, we've discussed the anatomy of the visual ventral stream and why it is effective, but we don't know how it actually recognizes objects, at least not yet. It is believed that the what pathway uses something known as population coding for recognition, which suggests that the same cells within this pathway code for different objects. As an example, there may be 100 given cells that are dedicated to coding different types of fruit, and another 100 dedicated to coding different types of bears, each one having a different level of activation for each item. The specifics of how population coding is able to work is a bit fuzzy, but that will likely be found in a few years, so stay tuned for that, I suppose. As usual, I could discuss the specifics of the what pathway all day, as I've never covered how the visual stream interacts with faces, bodies, and places, but that could be a video in itself. The anatomy and function of this pathway have been discussed, so you may be able to walk away from this video knowing the basics of how we are able to recognize objects. Though, there's still one thing left for this video. We should cover the real-world applications of this very special pathway. In terms of real-world applications, the knowledge and intricacies of the what pathway can be used in the field of creating artificial intelligence. Like with many parts of the brain, the knowledge about the visual ventral stream could be used to code artificial intelligence, as dystopian and creepy as that sounds. This could also be used in the subfield of AI and facial recognition specifically, which has been a hot topic, but I believe by mimicking the way our brains are set up, the AI may actually be able to learn how to recognize people and emotion. This could be done with caution, of course, and should be, but it would be a useful tool in future research and or educational spheres if it's executed correctly. Emphasis on executing it correctly, please. Anyways, additionally, the types of visual agnosia can be looked into further in research. There's always more to learn about disabilities and how individuals are affected by them, and perhaps a breakthrough about these types of agnosia is right around the corner. As an example, researchers could look into how population coding is affected by the different types of visual agnosia further. So, that's going to be it for this episode. I know that this one was more on the intense side, and I'm hoping it was digestible now. Perhaps the last two videos helped that? I'm hoping so. If it was still confusing, I'm open to clear things up in the comments to the best of my ability. But if you totally got what I was saying, feel free to subscribe and help out the channel. Next time, I'm going to discuss the second pathway that goes from our primary visual cortex, the dorsal stream, aka the where pathway. Once that's explained, you should have a more or less complete idea about how visual information travels throughout your brain. That will be the grand finale of this first series of videos, so it will probably be the hardest topic, but if you can get through it fine, you'll be a neuroscience pro. Or at least a pro in the making, kind of. Well then, I'm going to head out. Don't forget to stay sharp. Hello everyone, it's me, the Cogneuro Connoisseur, and I'm back with one more video covering how visual information travels throughout our system. The nervous system is covered. The path from our retinas to the primary visual cortex is covered. The what pathway that allows for recognition is covered. At this point, we just need to cover the dorsal visual system that informs us where an object is in our field of view. I've been hinting at the dorsal system as the where pathway during this entire mini-series, so without further ado, let's finally discuss it. While the ventral system goes from the primary visual cortex to the temporal lobe, closer to the bottom of the brain, the dorsal stream goes from the primary visual cortex to the parietal lobe, which is closer to the top of the brain. Along the dorsal stream, this information goes to the posterior parietal cortex, then gets split along three routes, sending information to the prefrontal cortex, the premotor cortex, and the medial temporal cortex, all of which can be found in the parietal lobe. If you'd like to know where the parietal lobe is in the brain, it's the top half of the mid-cerebral cortex, which is actually right above the temporal lobe. To elaborate more on the purpose of the where pathway, the information sent to the prefrontal cortex allows us to have a spatial working memory, letting us track where something was a few seconds ago and where it is currently, presumably to find out where it is heading in a few seconds. Additionally, information is sent to the premotor cortex, which lets us reach for and grab objects that we've determined to be within reach. Finally, the medial temporal cortex is important because it lets us navigate through space to prevent us from getting lost in an environment. This is likely why the dorsal path is so complicated, so that we can memorize movement, take actions, and navigate terrain, which can be important in any context. Whether it's for your daily commute or you're lost in the woods, the dorsal pathway has you covered. The dorsal pathway also gives people the ability to contrast between different spatial locations, such as left versus right, and up versus down, and there's additionally depth perception. See, we're able to tell the depth of something by making use of motion parallax, which is the principle that something that is closer will appear as larger, and that something further away will appear as smaller. This principle is facilitated by, you guessed it, the where pathway. This pathway also helps with frames of reference, which is the idea of understanding where an object is by comparing its location to other objects. We can use our eyes, head, or another object as a frame of reference typically. Different cells fire from different circumstances. For example, cells with a head-centered receptive field optimally fire when something appears at a given distance from the midline of the head. There are countless examples of different cells coded to fire under different stimuli, but you likely get the picture. The parietal cortex also gives us multisensory representations of space, allowing us to use two or more modalities such as touch and smell to reveal how far away something is, which is very cool. In the case of using touch and smell, the object is probably very close. If that's a malevolent bear, good luck. Anyways, to add a few more parts to how we use the dorsal pathway, we use areas MT and MST within the temporal lobe. These two areas help us predict patterns of movement. For example, they would kick in if a malevolent bear was barreling towards you, letting you know the direction that bear is headed, just like the prefrontal cortex. We also have our parohippocampal place area, the PPA, when it comes to navigating ourselves through an environment, whether it be familiar or foreign. It will often recognize familiar objects and inform us where we specifically are on a mental map when it sees those familiar objects, which is what our medial temporal lobe can do too. So, that was the difficult part. I went through a lot, so feel free to rewind. But if you got through all of that okay, you now may be asking, where can all this neuroscience be used? Well, this neuroscience can be used in our everyday lives. Whether we have to go from home to work, or home to school, or home to anywhere else we want to go. Learning specifically about navigation may help us navigate the environment better. See if we can acknowledge how we navigate. That may be a good first step to learning how to improve our navigation skills, because I don't know about you, but I get lost on the regular. A system like this could be actually used to create a GPS as well, or perhaps even a self-driving car with a built-in destination. As I've mentioned before, technology could be bolstered if it mimics our brains given the complexity of how we are set up. So why not set up technology with the same complexity, provided we do it correctly? I think it's a pretty good thought. Anyways, that's going to do it for now. As a matter of fact, I think that's going to be it for this 4-part series. I really hope this helped clear up how our brains work, and that you can all go forward and use this information wisely. Perhaps I've even sparked your interest in pursuing further things related to neuroscience, because as I've mentioned before, I've only scratched the surface of this extremely elaborate brain we have. So with that said, I will head out now. I've given you the tutorial on neuroscience, and now it's up to you to do the rest. I'll try to be active in the comments, though. If you need me to clear anything up, type it down below. Also, feel free to subscribe if this series helped you at all. I'm too happy to help, but if you could help the channel, that would be lovely as well. Kind of make it a win-win scenario. In fact, if this channel does well enough, I'll even upload more videos later. But I can't guarantee that, as I am a pretty busy person. Well, I think that's it. So, as always, stay sharp.